The wind cut through the desolate landscape like a blade, and Olivia Jenkins had long since lost feeling in her feet as she stumbled through the snow-covered trail, leading away from the burned ruins of her family's wagon. Blood still stained the white powder behind her, a crimson path marking where the outlaws had left her parents and younger brother after taking everything of value, including her shoes, leaving her with nothing but the thin dress on her back and a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had been walking for hours, maybe longer, time losing all meaning as the January cold of 1876 seeped into her bones and made each step feel like her last. But something deep inside her refused to let her simply lie down and surrender to the frozen wasteland that stretched endlessly in every direction across the Wyoming territory. The sun was beginning its descent when she heard the sound of hooves crunching through snow, and she turned with what little strength remained, expecting perhaps the outlaws returning to finish what they had started, or maybe hoping for death to finally claim her in whatever form it chose to arrive. Instead, she saw a lone rider on a dark bay horse, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind, his long duster coat dusted with snow. He reined in his horse about 10 feet from her, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other. This ragged barefoot girl of 19 with wild auburn hair and eyes that had seen too much horror in too short a time, and this weathered cowboy whose age she could not quite determine beneath the shadow of his hat. "You are going to die out here," he said, his voice rough but not unkind, stating a fact rather than passing judgment. He swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life in the saddle than on solid ground, and she noticed he was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with shoulders broad enough to block the wind when he stepped closer. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they assessed her situation with a practiced efficiency that spoke of someone accustomed to making quick decisions in dangerous circumstances. "Then I will die," Olivia heard herself say, though her voice cracked and barely rose above a whisper. "There is nothing left anyway." He looked past her at the trail of blood-spotted footprints she had left in the snow, then back at her face, reading the story written there with a clarity that made her want to look away. Without another word, he sat down in the snow and began pulling off his boots, well-worn leather that had clearly carried him across many miles. She watched in confusion as he set them beside her feet, then stood in his thick wool socks, snow immediately beginning to soak through them. "What are you doing?" she asked, the absurdity of the situation momentarily cutting through the fog of shock and exhaustion. "Giving you my boots," he replied simply. "Your feet are torn up and half frozen already. Those are going to be the death of you before anything else." He picked up the boots and held them out to her. "Put them on." "I cannot take your boots," she protested weakly, even as her body swayed with fatigue. "You will freeze." "I have another pair strapped to my saddle," he said, which she suspected might be a lie but could not summon the energy to argue. "And I have a horse. You are walking. Put them on, or I will put them on for you." There was no threat in his words, only a quiet determination that made her believe he would do exactly as he said. With trembling fingers, she accepted the boots, still warm from his feet, and tried to pull them on over her damaged, bloody feet. The pain made her gasp, but the warmth was so overwhelming that tears sprang to her eyes unbidden. The boots were far too large, but he produced a spare bandana from his pocket and tore it into strips, showing her how to wrap her feet more snugly so the boots would not slide off. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked quietly as he worked, his fingers gentle despite their obvious strength and the calluses that spoke of years handling rope and reins. She told him in halting words. the sentences coming out broken and disjointed, about how her family had been traveling from Missouri to meet her uncle in South Pass City, where he ran a mercantile. She explained how the outlaws had come upon them 2 days prior, 5 men with faces hidden behind bandanas, how her father had tried to protect them and had been shot down for his courage. She described how her mother had thrown herself over her younger brother Charlie, only 9 years old, and how the bullets had torn through them both while Olivia had hidden beneath the wagon, paralyzed by terror. The outlaws had taken their horses, their supplies, even pulled the boots from the bodies of her dead family before setting fire to the wagon and riding off, apparently assuming no one remained alive to tell the tale. "They took my shoes too," she finished, her voice hollow. "Pulled them right off my feet and laughed about it. Said they would fetch a good price in town because they were nearly new." The cowboy's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble that covered his face, but his hands remained steady as he finished wrapping her feet. "My name is Lucas Ellis," he said, standing and offering her his hand. "And you are not going to die out here. Not today, not like this." "Olivia Jenkins," she replied, taking his hand and letting him pull her upright. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her, and he caught her easily, one arm around her waist. "When did you last eat or drink anything?" Lucas asked, already guiding her toward his horse. "I do not remember," she admitted. "Before the attack, I think." He made a sound of disapproval and retrieved a canteen from his saddle, uncorking it and holding it to her lips. The water was cold and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. He let her drink for a moment, then pulled it away despite her protest. "Not too much at once or you will be sick," he said. "Trust me on this." He retrieved what looked like jerky from his saddlebag and tore off a small piece, placing it in her hand. "Chew this slowly. Let it soften in your mouth before you swallow." Olivia did as instructed, the salty meat making her mouth water painfully, her stomach cramping with sudden hunger. Lucas watched her carefully, his hand still steadying her, and she realized with some distant part of her mind that she was leaning against a complete stranger in the middle of nowhere, trusting him with her life because she had no other choice, and because something in his eyes told her he was not like the men who had murdered her family. "Where were you heading?" Lucas asked after giving her another small piece of jerky and a few more swallows of water. "South Pass City," Olivia said. "My uncle owns Jenkins Mercantile there, Thomas Jenkins. Do you know it?" Something flickered across Lucas's face, an expression she could not quite read. "I know it," he said carefully. "South Pass City is about 15 miles northwest from here. We can make it before full dark if we leave now, but you are in no condition to walk." "I can manage," she said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. "You will ride," Lucas said in a tone that brooked no argument. "I will walk beside you and lead the horse." "That is not fair to you," Olivia protested. "You already gave me your boots." "Life is not fair," Lucas replied, a bitter edge creeping into his voice. "If it was, you would not be standing here orphaned and barefoot in the snow, and I would not be a drifter cowboy with nothing to my name but a horse and a saddle. But we play the hand we are dealt, and right now, that means getting you somewhere safe before nightfall brings the temperature down further, and the wolves start hunting." The mention of wolves sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Lucas noticed and began untying his bedroll from behind the saddle. He shook out a thick wool blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, securing it so it would not fall as she rode. "Up you go," he said, and before she could protest again, he had lifted her easily and set her in the saddle. The horse, a patient-looking gelding with a white blaze down his face, turned his head to look at her with one large dark eye but made no move to object to this new rider. Lucas took the reins and began walking, leading the horse northwest across the snow-covered plains. Olivia gripped the saddle horn with both hands, swaying with exhaustion but held in place by the horse's steady gait and the blanket cocooning her. She watched the man walking ahead of her, this Lucas Ellis, who had given a stranger his boots and was now trudging through the snow in his socks without complaint. And she wondered what circumstances had brought him to this lonely trail at precisely the moment she needed saving. "Why are you out here alone?" she asked after they had been traveling for perhaps half an hour, the silence broken only by the crunch of snow and the wind whistling across the open plains. Lucas was quiet for so long she thought perhaps he would not answer. "I work ranches," he finally said. "Or I did. Been drifting from place to place for the past 2 years, taking work where I can find it. Was headed toward South Pass City myself. Heard there might be work at one of the mines or the surrounding ranches. Winter is a hard time to find steady employment, but a man does what he must." "Do you have family?" Olivia asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw his shoulders tense. "Had a brother once," Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral. "He died 3 years back. Consumption. Parents passed when I was 16, left me and my brother to make our own way. We worked cattle ranches together in Montana Territory, saved up enough to buy a small piece of land. Then Thomas got sick, and all that money went to doctors and medicine that did not help. After he passed, I could not stand to stay in that place anymore, so I sold it and started moving." "I am sorry," Olivia said softly, understanding the kind of loss that made a person want to keep moving, as if staying in one place meant letting the grief catch up and overwhelm you completely. "We all carry our sorrows," Lucas replied, glancing back at her. "Yours are fresh and raw. Mine have had time to scab over, though they never fully heal. But we survive. That is what people do. We survive and we keep moving forward because the alternative is to lay down and die, and that feels too much like quitting." They continued in silence after that, the sun sinking lower and painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. Olivia found herself drifting, exhaustion pulling at her consciousness, and she jerked awake several times to find Lucas's hand on her leg, steadying her in the saddle. "Stay awake if you can," he said. "We are not far now, and I need you conscious enough to tell your uncle who you are. A strange man riding into town with an unconscious woman on his horse tends to raise uncomfortable questions." That almost made her laugh, a sound that came out more like a sob. Lucas reached up without stopping his steady pace and squeezed her hand where it gripped the saddle horn, a brief gesture of comfort that made something in her chest tighten painfully. As darkness began to fall in earnest, lights appeared in the distance, the warm glow of lanterns and fires marking the town of South Pass City. Lucas kept them moving, his stride never faltering despite the fact that his socks were surely soaked through and his feet had to be freezing. Olivia tried not to think about the sacrifice he was making, tried not to feel the weight of debt settling onto her shoulders alongside the grief and trauma of the past 2 days. The town emerged from the twilight like something from a dream, a collection of wooden buildings lining a main street, with smaller structures sprawling out in every direction. She could hear the sounds of civilization, voices and music drifting from what was probably a saloon, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the bark of dogs. It should have felt welcoming after the endless silent snowfields, but instead it felt overwhelming, too much sensation after too much emptiness. Lucas led the horse directly down the main street, ignoring the curious looks from the few hardy souls still outside in the cold. He stopped in front of a building with a sign reading Jenkins Mercantile in bold letters, light spilling from the windows onto the snow-packed street. "Is this it?" Lucas asked, looking up at her, Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat. This was her uncle's store, the destination her family had been striving toward when death had found them on the trail. She was here, alive, but her parents and Charlie were gone, and she could not fathom how she was supposed to walk through that door and deliver such news. Lucas seemed to understand her hesitation. He tied his horse to the hitching post and reached up, his hands gentle as he helped her down from the saddle. Her legs buckled when her feet touched the ground, and he caught her again, holding her steady. "I will go in with you," he said quietly. "You should not do this alone." "You do not have to," Olivia whispered, but she was already leaning on him, her body making the decision her mind could not. "I know I do not have to," Lucas replied, "but I am going to anyway. Walk beside me, Olivia Jenkins. We will face this together." He kept one arm firmly around her waist as they climbed the 2 steps to the mercantile's porch. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a man in his 40s with thinning brown hair and kind eyes that widened in shock as he took in the sight before him. "Dear God," the man breathed. "Olivia, is that you, Uncle Thomas?" Olivia managed, and then the tears she had been holding back broke free in a flood. "They are dead, all of them. Papa and Mama and Charlie, they are all dead." Thomas Jenkins went pale, one hand gripping the doorframe for support. His gaze moved from Olivia to Lucas, questions forming, but Lucas spoke before he could ask them. "Your niece was attacked on the trail 2 days ago," Lucas said, his voice steady and factual. "Outlaws. I found her about 15 miles southeast of here, walking barefoot through the snow. Her family did not survive. She needs a doctor, warm food, and somewhere safe to rest. After that, there will be time for the full story." Thomas seemed to pull himself together through sheer force of will. "Yes, of course, bring her inside. Mary," he called over his shoulder. "Mary, come quickly." A woman appeared from the back of the store, round-faced and gentle-looking, perhaps a few years younger than Thomas. She took one look at Olivia and immediately hurried forward, her motherly instincts clearly overriding any need for explanation. "Oh, you poor dear," Mary said, taking Olivia from Lucas's supporting arm and guiding her into the warmth of the store. "Thomas, fetch Dr. Harrison immediately. And you, young man, come inside before you freeze to death. Good heavens, you are wearing wet socks in the snow." Lucas hesitated, but Thomas was already pulling on his coat and heading out into the night to find the doctor, and Mary was ushering them both toward a doorway at the back of the store that led to the family's living quarters. Olivia found herself seated in a chair by a blazing fireplace, Mary wrapping her in more blankets and pressing a cup of hot tea into her trembling hands. Lucas stood awkwardly near the door, clearly uncertain whether he should stay or leave now that Olivia was safely delivered to her family. His feet were wet and probably numb, his face drawn with cold and exhaustion, but he made no complaint. "Sit down," Mary ordered, pointing to another chair. "I will not have you standing there dripping on my floor. Take off those wet socks and put your feet near the fire before you lose your toes to frostbite." Lucas obeyed, moving like a man unaccustomed to being cared for, and sat in the chair Mary had indicated. He peeled off his soaked socks, revealing feet that were indeed worryingly pale and cold. Mary disappeared and returned a moment later with a basin of lukewarm water. "Put your feet in this," she instructed. "Not too hot at first or it will damage the tissue. We will warm them gradually." While Lucas soaked his feet, Mary knelt in front of Olivia and carefully began removing the boots Lucas had given her, her expression growing grim as she unwrapped the makeshift bandages and revealed the torn, bloody, half-frozen feet beneath. Olivia bit her lip to keep from crying out as feeling began returning in painful waves. "These need proper tending," Mary said quietly. "The doctor will know what to do. In the meantime, We will get them clean and wrapped properly." She worked with efficient gentleness, bringing warm water and clean cloths, carefully washing away the blood and dirt while Olivia gripped the arms of the chair and tried not to whimper. Lucas watched from his seat, his jaw tight, and Olivia realized he was angry on her behalf, furious at the men who had done this to her and her family. Thomas returned within minutes with a tired-looking man carrying a black medical bag. Dr. Harrison was perhaps 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen most of what life could throw at a person. He examined Olivia's feet with gentle thoroughness, applied a salve that smelled sharply of herbs, and wrapped them in clean bandages. "You are fortunate," he told her. "Another few hours and you likely would have lost toes, possibly more. As it is, you will heal, though it will take time and you must stay off your feet as much as possible for at least a week." He turned his attention to Lucas, checking his feet as well despite the cowboy's protests that he was fine. "You will be fine," the doctor agreed, "though that was a foolish thing to do, walking through snow in just your socks. Then again, I suppose it was a good thing you did, or this young lady would not be here." After the doctor left, Mary insisted on feeding them both, producing bowls of hearty stew and thick slices of bread despite Olivia's protests that she could not possibly eat. Lucas ate slowly, mechanically, and Olivia realized he had probably given her most of his provisions on the trail, leaving little for himself. She forced herself to eat as well, the food sitting heavy in her traumatized stomach, but beginning to restore some small measure of strength. When they had eaten, Thomas sat down across from them, his face grave. "Tell me everything," he said gently. "I know it is difficult, but I need to understand what happened to my brother and his family." Olivia told the story again, with Lucas filling in details about where he had found her and the state she had been in. Thomas listened with growing horror, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, struggling with his grief. "I will inform the sheriff first thing tomorrow," Thomas finally said, his voice thick. "Though tracking outlaws across winter territory is nearly impossible, and with 2 days already passed, the trail will be cold. Still, it must be reported." He looked at Olivia with deep sadness. "You are welcome here, of course. This is your home now for as long as you need it. You are family and we will take care of you." "Thank you," Olivia whispered, fresh tears sliding down her face. Thomas turned to Lucas, and his expression shifted to something more complex, gratitude mixed with something else Olivia could not quite identify. "And you, Mr. Ellis. My niece would be dead if not for your intervention. I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." "You owe me nothing," Lucas said firmly. "Any decent person would have done the same." "Any decent person would like to think so," Thomas replied, "but we both know that is not true. You gave her your boots and walked through the snow to bring her here safely. That speaks to your character." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "You said you were looking for work in South Pass City." "I was," Lucas confirmed cautiously. "I could use help at the mercantile," Thomas said. "The work is not glamorous, mostly hauling freight, stocking shelves, making deliveries to the outlying ranches and mines. The pay is fair, and there is a small room above the store that is currently empty. It is not much, but it is warm and dry." Lucas stared at him for a moment, clearly surprised. "That is generous of you, Mr. Jenkins, but you do not need to offer me employment out of gratitude." "I am not," Thomas said bluntly. "Or not entirely. I genuinely do need help. My last employee left a month ago for the goldfields in the Black Hills, chasing dreams of quick riches. I have been managing alone, but it is too much for one person, especially during winter when deliveries are difficult. If you are interested, the job is yours. If not, I understand, and you are welcome to stay the night in that room regardless before moving on." Olivia watched Lucas process this offer, seeing the wariness in his eyes of a man accustomed to drifting, uncomfortable with putting down roots, even temporarily. But she also saw exhaustion there and perhaps a flicker of something like longing for stability, a place to rest even if just for a season. "I would be grateful for the work," Lucas said finally. "Thank you." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Good. We will discuss details tomorrow after we have all had some rest. Mary, would you show Mr. Ellis to the upstairs room?" Mary led Lucas away, and Thomas helped Olivia to a small bedroom off the living quarters, clearly set up for guests. "This was going to be your parents' room," he said quietly. "Yours and Charlie's was meant to be the one next door. I am so sorry, Olivia. Your father was a good man, and he deserved better than to die on some lonely trail." "He tried to protect us," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "He told Mama to take Charlie and run, but she would not leave him. They died together, and I hid like a coward." "You survived," Thomas said firmly, gripping her shoulders gently. "That is not cowardice. That is living, which is what your parents would have wanted for you. Do not dishonor their memory by thinking your survival was somehow wrong." He left her alone then, and Olivia changed into a nightgown Mary had left for her, climbing into the soft bed with its clean sheets and warm quilts. She should have felt safe, comfortable, relieved to be out of the cold and with family. Instead, she felt numb and hollow, the events of the past days replaying behind her closed eyelids every time she tried to sleep. Somewhere above her, Lucas Ellis was settling into his own room, and she wondered if he was also lying awake, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling and thinking about the strange turns life took. She thought about his hands, steady and gentle as he wrapped her feet, about the way he had walked through the snow without complaint, about the quiet strength in his voice when he told her to walk beside him. She had known him for only a few hours, but in that time, he had shown her more kindness than she would have thought existed in the world after what the outlaws had done. Sleep eventually claimed her, pulling her down into dreams that were sometimes memories of her family's laughter and sometimes nightmares of gunshots and blood in the snow. The days that followed passed in a haze of grief and healing. Olivia remained mostly in bed those first few days as her feet slowly mended, accepting Mary's gentle care and Thomas's awkward, but sincere, attempts at comfort. The sheriff came and took her statement, a grizzled man named Coleman who promised to send word to neighboring towns and keep watch for outlaws matching the description she provided, though they all knew the chances of justice were slim. Thomas made arrangements to travel out to where the attack had occurred, bringing back what little remained of the wagon and its contents, which was not much. He and some men from town buried what they found of Olivia's family in the South Pass City Cemetery, marking the graves with simple wooden crosses. Olivia attended the brief service in a wheelchair that Lucas had borrowed from the doctor, her bandaged feet unable to bear her weight yet, and she wept as a minister who had never known her parents or brother spoke generic words of comfort over their graves. Lucas stood at the back of the small gathering of townspeople who had come to pay respects, his hat in his hands, and when the service ended and people began to disperse, he pushed her wheelchair back to the mercantile without being asked. He had not spoken much to her since that first night, seeming to understand that she needed space to grieve, but his presence had become a quiet constant. She would hear him downstairs in the store, helping Thomas with the heavy work, his voice a low rumble as he greeted customers. Sometimes she would see him from her window, loading wagons for deliveries or hauling in supplies, his movements efficient and practiced. A week after her arrival, Dr. Harrison declared her feet healed enough to begin walking short distances, though she was to take it slowly and continue resting as much as possible. Mary helped her dress and come downstairs for meals, and Olivia found herself in the mercantile proper for the first time, taking in the shelves stocked with everything from foodstuffs to tools to bolts of fabric. Lucas was behind the counter, helping a ranch wife calculate the cost of her purchases. He looked up when Olivia entered, and something flickered across his face, an expression that might have been relief or gladness before his features settled back into their usual neutral calm. The ranch wife noticed Olivia, and her expression softened with sympathy. "You must be poor Thomas's niece," the woman said kindly. "I am Mrs. Patterson. I am so very sorry for your loss, dear. This is a good town and we take care of our own. If you need anything at all, you just let folks know." "Thank you," Olivia managed, still unused to the waves of sympathy from strangers, each expression of condolence a reminder of what she had lost. After Mrs. Patterson left, Lucas came around the counter. "You should not be standing long on those feet yet," he said, his tone more concerned than scolding. He pulled over a stool from behind the counter. "Sit here if you want to be down in the store. I am sure Thomas and Mary would appreciate the company, and it might help to have something to do besides sit alone with your thoughts." Olivia sank onto the stool gratefully, her feet already beginning to ache from the short walk downstairs. "Is it that obvious," she asked, "that I am going mad up in that room with nothing but my memories?" "It is obvious that you are grieving," Lucas said carefully, leaning against the counter near her. "Grief needs time and space, but it also needs to be balanced with living. Your uncle mentioned that your mother was good with numbers, helped manage your father's business back in Missouri. Maybe you could help with the store's accounts, give you something to focus on." "How did you know I am good with numbers too?" Olivia asked, something like curiosity penetrating the fog of sorrow. "I did not," Lucas admitted. "But you strike me as someone who notices details, who thinks things through, seemed worth suggesting." Thomas overheard and thought it was an excellent idea, soon setting Olivia up with the mercantile's ledgers and account books. She discovered that working with the neat columns of numbers and figures did help, giving her mind something concrete to organize and control when everything else felt chaotic and painful. She began spending her days on the stool behind the counter, managing accounts and occasionally helping customers who came in when Thomas and Lucas were busy with other tasks. The work brought her into closer proximity with Lucas, who was in and out of the store throughout each day. They developed an easy rhythm, communicating with small gestures and brief words as they worked. Lucas would bring her tea without being asked, seeming to know when she had been sitting too long and needed a warm cup in her hands. Olivia would have invoices ready for him when he returned from deliveries, making his reports to Thomas more efficient. She began to learn things about him through observation and the occasional conversation. He was 24 years old, only 5 years her senior. He read voraciously, borrowing books from the small collection Thomas kept in the living quarters, and she would sometimes see him late in the evening, sitting on the mercantile's porch despite the cold, his face illuminated by lamplight as he turned pages. He was unfailingly polite to everyone, but kept people at a careful distance, friendly without being truly friends with anyone. He worked harder than seemed necessary, as if trying to outrun something, and he never spoke of plans beyond the next day or week, living in a perpetual present that refused to acknowledge a future. February arrived with even colder temperatures and heavier snows. Olivia's feet healed enough that she could walk without pain, though she still favored them slightly. She and Lucas fell into a pattern of working together in the store, while Thomas focused on the business side of things, and Mary managed the household. The townspeople had accepted Olivia's presence, treating her with a mixture of sympathy and welcome that she found both comforting and suffocating. One particularly cold afternoon when the store was empty of customers, Olivia was working on the ledgers while Lucas restocked shelves. The silence between them had grown comfortable over the past weeks, but today it felt different somehow, weighted with something unspoken. "Why did you really stop for me that day?" Olivia asked suddenly, not looking up from her work. "You could have ridden past, assumed I was already dead or beyond help. Most people would have." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, and she could hear him setting down the canned goods he had been arranging. "I lost someone once," he finally said. "Someone I should have saved but did not. I swore after that I would never again ride past someone who needed help, no matter the cost or inconvenience to myself." Olivia looked up at him then, seeing the pain carved into the lines around his eyes and mouth. "Your brother." "No," Lucas said, and something in his voice made her heart clench. "A woman. Her name was Catherine. We were going to be married." The words hung in the air between them, and Olivia felt as though she had opened a door she had no right to open. "You do not have to tell me," she said quickly. "Maybe I need to," Lucas replied. He came and sat on a crate near her stool, his hands dangling between his knees, his gaze fixed on something far away. "We grew up together in Montana, neighboring ranches. I loved her from the time I was 15 years old. When we were 21, I asked her to marry me and she said yes. We were going to wed in the spring after the calving season." He paused, his jaw working. "There was a fire at her family's ranch that winter, started in the barn and spread to the house. I saw the smoke from our place, rode over as fast as I could. Her father and brothers were trying to fight the fire, and Catherine was inside trying to save her mother who could not walk well after a fall she had taken earlier that year. The men were shouting at her to get out, that it was too dangerous, but she would not leave her mother behind." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, knowing where this story was going. "I got there just as part of the roof collapsed," Lucas continued, his voice hollow. "Her father tried to run in after her and I stopped him. Held him back because I could see it was too late, that the whole structure was coming down and going in would just mean 2 more deaths. He fought me, and while we struggled, the rest of the house collapsed. Catherine and her mother both died in there, and her father never forgave me for stopping him. Said I had let his daughter die, that I had not tried hard enough to save her." "That was not your fault," Olivia said fiercely. "You saved her father's life." "He did not see it that way," Lucas said with a bitter twist to his mouth. "And maybe he was right. Maybe I should have gone in anyway, tried harder, done something other than hold him back while she burned. After the funeral, I could not stay there anymore. My brother was already sick by then, so I focused on taking care of him. When he died a year later, there was nothing left holding me to that place. So I started drifting, taking work where I could find it, never staying long enough for attachments or responsibilities beyond the next job." He finally looked at her, his gray-blue eyes dark with old pain. "When I saw you on that trail, barefoot and bleeding and walking toward certain death, I saw a chance to do what I failed to do before, to actually save someone instead of just watching them die, so I stopped. I gave you my boots and I brought you here, and I would do it again without hesitation because maybe, just maybe, it balances the scales a little bit." Olivia reached out and took his hand, the gesture surprising them both. His fingers were work-roughened and strong, and they closed around hers with a gentleness that made her throat tight. "You cannot spend your whole life trying to make up for something that was not your fault," she said softly. "Catherine's death was a tragedy, but it was not your doing. Sometimes terrible things happen and there is no one to blame, nothing anyone could have done differently. "I know that in my head," Lucas said, "but my heart is a different matter." "I understand," Olivia replied, and she did. Her own heart still carried the weight of guilt for surviving when her family had not, for hiding beneath that wagon instead of doing something, anything, to try to save them. Rationally, she knew she would simply have died alongside them, that there had been nothing a 19-year-old girl could have done against 5 armed men. But rationality did little to ease the burden of survivor's guilt. They sat there in the quiet store, hands clasped, 2 people bound by loss and saved by chance, and something shifted between them. The connection that had been forming through weeks of shared space and small kindnesses crystallized into something more tangible, an understanding that went beyond words. Neither of them spoke of it, not then, but when Lucas eventually released her hand and returned to his work, and Olivia turned back to her ledgers, they both felt the change humming in the air around them. The winter deepened as February gave way to March, and with it came the kind of cold that made leaving the warmth of the mercantile feel like a physical punishment. Lucas still made his delivery rounds to the surrounding ranches and mines, often returning with ice crusting his beard and his coat stiff with frozen snow. Olivia found herself watching for his return each time he left, a knot of worry in her chest that only eased when she heard his horse outside and his boots on the porch. Mary noticed, of course. She had a way of noticing things, and one evening while they were preparing dinner together, she gave Olivia a knowing look. "That young man has become important to you," she said. It was not quite a question. Olivia felt heat rise to her face. "He saved my life," she said, as if that explained everything. "He did," Mary agreed. "And you have helped save his, I think, though in a different way. Thomas says Lucas has changed since you arrived, more settled somehow, less like a man constantly preparing to run." "I do not know what you mean," Olivia said, focusing intently on the potatoes she was peeling. Mary laughed softly. "Yes, you do, and it is nothing to be ashamed of, dear. You are both young, both carrying heavy sorrows. It is natural that you would find comfort in each other's company. I simply want you to be careful with your heart. It is still healing from a terrible wound." "My heart is the least of my concerns," Olivia replied, but even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Her heart had been growing increasingly concerned with Lucas Ellis, with the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face, with the sound of his laughter when Thomas told a particularly terrible joke, with the gentle way he handled difficult customers and skittish horses alike. She realized with something like despair, falling in love with him, and that felt like a betrayal of her family, whose graves were barely 2 months old. How could she think about love and possible futures when her parents and brother were dead? How could she let herself feel happiness or hope, or the warm flutter in her chest when Lucas looked at her in that particular way? Mary seemed to read some of this internal struggle on her face, because she set down her own knife and came around the table to pull Olivia into a hug. "Your family would want you to live," she said firmly. "To heal and grow and, yes, eventually to love again. Surviving is not betraying them. Building a new life is not forgetting them. You carry them with you always, but you are allowed to be happy despite your grief." Olivia clung to her aunt, letting the tears come again because they still came so easily, triggered by the smallest things. Mary held her and stroked her hair, and when the storm passed, they finished making dinner together without speaking more of it. That night, unable to sleep, Olivia wrapped herself in a shawl and crept downstairs. She found Lucas on the porch as she had somehow known she would, sitting on the bench with a book in his lap, though he was not reading it. Instead, he was staring out at the snow-covered street, his expression distant. "May I join you?" Olivia asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprised but not displeased. "It is cold out here." "It is cold everywhere," she replied, stepping out and closing the door behind her. She sat beside him on the bench, tucking the shawl more tightly around herself. They sat in silence for a while, their breath misting in the frigid air. Finally, Lucas spoke. "I have been thinking about leaving," he said quietly. Olivia's heart lurched painfully. "Why?" "Because that is what I do," Lucas said. "I work a place for a season, save up some money and move on before things get complicated. Before people start expecting me to stay, to put down roots, to be someone I am not sure I know how to be anymore." "What if someone wanted you to stay?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not expecting you to be anyone other than who you are, but just wanting you here." Lucas turned to look at her, and in the light spilling from the mercantile windows, she could see the conflict on his face. "That would make leaving much harder," he said. "Which is why I should probably go sooner rather than later, before that wanting becomes something neither of us can walk away from easily." "Maybe some things are not meant to be walked away from," Olivia said, finding courage from somewhere deep inside. "Maybe some things are meant to be stayed for." "Olivia," Lucas said, and her name sounded like a prayer and a warning both. "You do not know what you are saying. You are still grieving, still healing. I am the first person who showed you kindness after the worst thing that ever happened to you. That is not the same as actually caring for someone. That is gratitude and trauma and proximity, all mixed up together." "Do not tell me what I feel," Olivia said, a spark of anger cutting through the vulnerability. "I know my own heart, Lucas Ellis. Yes, I am grieving. Yes, I am still healing. But I also know that when you are gone from the store, I watch for your return. I know that your voice has become the sound I most want to hear. I know that when I think about the future, which I could not bear to do at all a few weeks ago, you are in it." Lucas closed his eyes as if in pain. "I cannot offer you what you deserve. I am a drifter with nothing to my name. I have no prospects, no stability, no home. You should want someone better, someone who can give you security and a proper life." "I want someone who gave me his boots in the snow," Olivia said firmly. "I want someone who walked beside me when I was too broken to walk alone. I want someone who understands loss and keeps going anyway. I want you, Lucas, just as you are." He opened his eyes and looked at her, and she could see him wavering, wanting to believe but afraid to reach for something he thought he did not deserve. Slowly, carefully, giving him every chance to pull away, Olivia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he did not respond, and she thought she had ruined everything, had misread the situation entirely. Then his hand came up to cup the back of her head, and he was kissing her back with a tenderness that made her heart ache. It was gentle and careful, a question and an answer both, and when they finally drew apart, Olivia could see tears on his face. "I am afraid," Lucas admitted, his voice rough. "Afraid to care for someone again because I know how much it destroys you when they are taken away. Everyone I have ever loved has died, Olivia. My parents, my brother Catherine. I am terrified that if I let myself love you, the same thing will happen, and I do not think I could survive that again." "We are all going to die eventually," Olivia said, keeping her hand against his cheek. "That is part of being alive, but we cannot stop ourselves from living and loving because we are afraid of that inevitable ending. My parents loved each other for 23 years, and then they died together on that trail, but I do not think my father would have given up a single moment of that time to avoid the pain of losing her. The love was worth it. The time together was worth it. Even with how it ended," Lucas asked. "Even with how it ended," Olivia confirmed. "Because the alternative is to go through life alone, never letting anyone close, never taking the risk. That is not living, Lucas. That is just existing. You have been existing for 3 years, drifting from place to place, never staying, never connecting. Is that really what you want for the rest of your life?" Lucas was quiet for a long time, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her cheek. "No," he finally whispered. "It is not. But I do not know how to stop. I do not know how to stay." "You start by choosing to stay tomorrow," Olivia said, "and then the day after that. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Stay with me, Lucas. Take the risk. Let yourself care again." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her hair. She could feel him trembling, this strong man who had seemed so unshakable, and she held him just as tightly, two damaged people clinging to each other in the cold Wyoming night. "I will try," Lucas murmured against her hair. "For you, I will try to stay." It was not a promise of forever, not yet, but it was a beginning. They sat together on the porch until the cold drove them inside, and they parted at the stairs with another soft kiss, and the unspoken understanding that everything had changed between them. In the days that followed, their relationship shifted into something openly acknowledged. Lucas still did his work, and Olivia still managed the accounts, but there were now stolen moments of hand-holding when no one was looking, soft smiles across the store, and evenings spent together talking about everything and nothing. Thomas and Mary watched with approval, pleased to see both young people beginning to heal and find happiness together. Spring began to assert itself in late March, the brutal cold easing slightly, snow beginning to melt in earnest during the warmer afternoon hours before refreezing at night. Lucas took Olivia on short walks around town when the weather allowed, his arm steady when the icy patches threatened her still tender feet. They talked about their pasts, their families, their dreams and fears, building the kind of deep knowledge of each other that comes from true intimacy rather than mere proximity. One April afternoon, when the first hints of green were showing on the southern-facing slopes around town, Lucas took Olivia on a longer walk up to the cemetery. They stood together at the graves of her family, Lucas's arm around her waist as she laid wildflowers she had purchased from a woman who grew them in a small greenhouse. "I told them about you," Olivia said quietly. "In my mind, I hope they would have liked you." "I hope so too," Lucas replied, "though your father might have had some pointed questions about my intentions toward his daughter." "What are your intentions?" Olivia asked, turning to look up at him with a small smile. Lucas met her gaze steadily. "Entirely honorable and completely serious," he said. "I love you, Olivia Jenkins. I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone again, but here we are. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Joy flooded through her, bright and warm. "I love you too," she said. "And yes, I will have you. I will have you for as long as you will stay." "Then I guess I am staying permanently," Lucas said, and kissed her there among the graves, a promise of life and future in a place of death and past. They were married in June, when the Wyoming summer had finally asserted itself, and the mountains were green and beautiful. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, with Thomas walking Olivia down the aisle and Mary weeping happy tears in the front pew. The entire town turned out, this community that had embraced Olivia in her darkest hour and had watched her relationship with Lucas blossom into something genuine and good. Lucas wore a new suit that Thomas had helped him purchase, and Olivia wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mary had spent weeks sewing with careful attention to every detail. When the minister asked Lucas if he took this woman to be his wife, his voice was steady and sure as he said, "I do." And when Olivia said the same words, she meant them with every fiber of her being. They moved into a small house on the edge of town that Thomas helped them purchase, a wedding gift combined with wages Lucas had saved from his months at the mercantile. It was modest but theirs, and they filled it with second-hand furniture and laughter and the quiet joy of building a life together. Lucas continued working for Thomas, eventually becoming a full partner in the mercantile as the business grew and expanded. Olivia managed the books and eventually began teaching reading and arithmetic to the town's children, having discovered a talent for education. Their first child arrived in the spring of 1878, a son they named Charlie Thomas Ellis, honoring both Olivia's lost brother and the uncle who had given them both a home and a chance. Lucas was a devoted father, patient and gentle with the baby in a way that made Olivia fall even more deeply in love with him. She would sometimes catch him late at night, sitting in the rocking chair with their son in his arms, singing soft cowboy songs and looking at the baby with an expression of wonder and fierce protectiveness. "I am terrified every single day that something will happen to him," Lucas confessed to her one evening after they had put Charlie down to sleep. "Every fever, every cough, I am convinced we are going to lose him." "I know," Olivia said, taking his hand. "I feel it too. But we cannot live in fear, remember? We just love them as hard as we can for as long as we have them." Lucas pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You are braver than I am," he said. "No," Olivia replied. "I just learned from someone very wise that staying is braver than running, and loving is braver than being alone. You taught me that, even if you did not know it at the time." Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Mary Ellis, arrived 2 years later. Lucas held his tiny daughter and wept openly, finally able to speak Catherine's name without the crippling guilt he had carried for so long. "I think she would have liked this," he said, looking at Olivia with tears streaming down his face. "I think she would have wanted me to heal and be happy and name a child after her." "Does that sound foolish?" "It sounds like healing," Olivia replied, her own eyes wet. "It sounds like you are finally forgiving yourself." As the years passed, they built a life that was rich and full despite its humble origins. The mercantile thrived under Thomas and Lucas's partnership, becoming one of the most successful businesses in South Pass City. Olivia's school grew as well, eventually operating out of a proper schoolhouse that the town built specifically for that purpose. They had 2 more children, another son named Thomas Lucas and another daughter named Mary Ann, and their house rang with noise and chaos and love. Thomas and Mary grew older gracefully, delighted with the grandchildren that filled their lives with joy. They remained active in the mercantile until their 70s, finally retiring and leaving the business entirely in Lucas and Olivia's capable hands. Lucas never fully lost the shadows in his eyes, the ghosts of everyone he had loved and lost, but they no longer haunted him in the same way. He had learned to carry his grief alongside his joy, to honor the past while living fully in the present. He was known throughout South Pass City as a fair businessman and a good man, someone who could be counted on to help a neighbor in need and who never forgot what it meant to be desperate and alone. Olivia never forgot that day on the snowy trail either. Sometimes in winter, when the snow fell heavy and cold, she would look out the window of their warm home filled with children and laughter, and she would remember being 19 and barefoot, and certain she was going to die. She would remember a lonely cowboy who gave her his boots and told her to walk beside him, who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier, who saved her life and then stayed to build one with her. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Lucas presented her with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a pair of boots, beautiful and well-made, clearly expensive. But tucked inside one boot was something else, the old, worn boots he had given her that day on the trail, boots she had not seen in years. "I kept them," Lucas said as she lifted them out with trembling hands. Thomas had them stored in the back of the mercantile after you healed and did not need them anymore. I could not bring myself to throw them away or sell them. They seemed important somehow. Olivia ran her fingers over the cracked leather, remembering how they had felt still warm from his feet, how they had been far too large but had nonetheless carried her to safety. "They are the most precious thing I own," she said, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. "Because they represent the moment my life began again. The moment you chose to stop and help a stranger, even though it cost you. The moment everything changed." "No," Lucas said, pulling her into his arms. "They represent the moment I finally stopped running and started living. You gave me that gift, Olivia. You gave me a reason to stay." They stood together in their home, surrounded by 25 years of memories and the sounds of their grandchildren playing outside. Two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had chosen to build something beautiful from that shared pain. The old boots went into a place of honor on their mantelpiece, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of a life well lived. Charlie, their eldest, grew into a strong young man who took over much of the physical work at the mercantile. His father's steady nature combined with his mother's sharp mind for business. Catherine became a teacher like her mother, taking over the school when Olivia finally decided to retire. Thomas went into mining, finding moderate success in the gold claims that still dotted the mountains around South Pass City. Mary Ann married a rancher and filled Olivia and Lucas's later years with even more grandchildren to spoil and love. Thomas Jenkins passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Mary following him less than a year later, unable or unwilling to live long without her partner of 50 years. Their deaths were grieved but not tragic, 2 lives fully lived and completed. Olivia mourned the uncle who had given her a home when she had nothing, and Lucas mourned the man who had given him a chance when he needed it most. As they grew older themselves, Olivia and Lucas would sit together on the porch of their home in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing, the comfortable conversations of people who had spent decades learning each other's thoughts. Lucas's hair went silver, and Olivia's auburn faded to a soft gray, but their hands still fit together the same way they had that first night on the mercantile porch when she had told him to stay. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked her one evening when they were both well into their 60s. "Tying yourself to a drifter cowboy with nothing to offer but a pair of worn-out boots," Olivia laughed, the sound still bright despite her age. "Those boots saved my life," she said. "And that cowboy gave me everything worth having, so no, I do not regret a single moment. Not even when I tracked mud through the house, or forgot our anniversary that one year, or burned dinner that time you were sick," Lucas asked with a smile. "Not even then," Olivia confirmed, "though you are still making up for the forgotten anniversary." "I will spend the rest of my life making up for it if that is what it takes," Lucas said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, and Olivia thought about the strange paths life took, how the worst day of her life had led directly to the best years, how tragedy and joy were so often intertwined that you could not have one without the other. She thought about her parents and Charlie, gone now for more than 40 years, and hoped that wherever they were, they could see what she had built from the ashes of that terrible day. She hoped they were proud of her for surviving, for healing, for learning to love again despite the pain. Lucas seemed to be thinking along similar lines because he said quietly, "I used to think that loving people was a weakness, that caring deeply just set you up for unbearable pain when they were inevitably taken from you. But I was wrong. The pain is worth it, Olivia." Every single moment of fear and worry and eventual grief is worth it for the years of joy in between. You sound very wise for a drifter cowboy, Olivia teased gently. I learned from the best, Lucas replied, squeezing her hand. A brave young woman who was not afraid to tell me I was being a fool and to demand that I stay and take a chance on happiness. I was terrified, Olivia admitted. The day I told you I wanted you to stay, I was absolutely terrified you would leave anyway. I had already lost everyone I loved, and the thought of caring for someone again and possibly losing them too was almost more than I could bear. But you were worth the risk. You have always been worth the risk. They remained on the porch until the cold drove them inside, moving slowly but together, still walking beside each other as they had from that first day. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, helped each other prepare for bed with the practiced ease of decades of partnership, and lay down together in the darkness. I love you, Lucas said, as he had said every night for more than 40 years. I love you too, Olivia replied, as she always did, and they drifted off to sleep holding hands. Lucas passed away in his sleep at the age of 71, his heart simply stopping in the night, giving out after a life fully lived. Olivia woke to find him gone, peaceful and pain-free. And though her grief was sharp and deep, there was also gratitude that he had not suffered, that he had simply slipped away quietly after an evening of laughter and love. She buried him in the South Pass City Cemetery, not far from her parents and brother, near Thomas and Mary Jenkins. Their children and grandchildren surrounded her, 3 generations of family that existed because a lonely cowboy had stopped to help a barefoot girl in the snow all those years ago. Olivia lived another 8 years without Lucas, years that were both lonely and full. She was surrounded by family, by the community they had built together, by the legacy of love and kindness they had created. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the story of how she met their grandfather, how he had given her his boots and told her to walk beside him, how that single act of compassion had saved her life and changed everything. When she finally passed away at the age of 79, peacefully in her sleep like Lucas had, her family buried her next to him. They placed a single pair of old, worn boots in the casket with her, the boots Lucas had given her that day, the boots she had treasured all her life. On the shared headstone, below their names and dates, their children had engraved a simple phrase. They walked beside each other. The mercantile continued to operate for another generation, before eventually closing as South Pass City declined with the exhaustion of the gold mines. The schoolhouse remained, though it too eventually shut down as families moved away seeking opportunities elsewhere. The little house Lucas and Olivia had built together changed hands many times, each new family unaware of the love story that had filled its rooms. But stories have a way of persisting even when the people and places fade. The tale of the lonely cowboy and the barefoot girl became part of South Pass City's history, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy. Some versions made Lucas into a heroic figure larger than life. Others made Olivia into a damsel in need of constant rescue. The truth, as is often the case, was both simpler and more profound than the legends. 2 broken people had found each other in a moment of desperate need. One had offered practical help with no expectation of reward, and the other had offered a reason to stop running and put down roots. Together, they had built something that lasted not because it was perfect, but because they chose it every day, through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard. They had loved each other with the full knowledge that loss was inevitable, and they had decided that the love was worth the eventual pain. In the end, that was the real story. Not a fairy tale of perfect happiness, but a realistic account of two people who had faced terrible losses and had found the courage to risk their hearts again. They had walked beside each other through decades of life, supporting each other's weight when needed, celebrating each other's triumphs, weathering storms together. They had created a family, built a business, served a community, and loved each other with the kind of deep, abiding devotion that transforms ordinary lives into something extraordinary. The old boots that Lucas had given Olivia that snowy day in January of 1876 were eventually displayed in a small museum when one opened briefly in South Pass City in the 1920s, a curator having recognized them from the story. Visitors would look at the cracked leather and try to imagine the desperation and the kindness they represented, but few could truly grasp the significance of such a simple act, because in the end, it was not the boots themselves that mattered. It was what they symbolized. The choice to stop when passing by would have been easier, the decision to give when taking would have been simpler, the courage to care when staying distant would have been safer. It was the moment when one person looked at another person's suffering and said, "I will help carry your burden, even at cost to myself." That was the gift Lucas had given Olivia on that frozen trail. Not just boots or survival, but the reminder that kindness still existed in a brutal world, that strangers could be trusted, that life could still hold beauty and love even after unimaginable loss. And in return, Olivia had given Lucas permission to stop running from his pain, to put down roots, to believe that he deserved happiness and stability and love. They had saved each other that day in the snow, though neither of them fully understood it at the time. And then they had spent the rest of their lives continuing to save each other, over and over, in 1,000 small ways and a few large ones, building a partnership that sustained them both through whatever challenges life threw their way. Their great-great-grandchildren still live in Wyoming, scattered across the state, most of them unaware of the full story of their ancestors. But occasionally, when winter storms blow through and snow covers the high plains and mountains, someone will tell the old story about the cowboy and the barefoot girl, keeping the memory alive one more generation. And somewhere in that telling, the essential truth remains: that love is always a risk worth taking, that kindness can save lives, and that sometimes the best thing we can do for each other is to offer our boots and say, "Walk beside me." The Mercantile Building still stands in South Pass City, now a historical site that tourists visit when exploring what remains of this once thriving gold town. A plaque on the wall tells the basic facts about Thomas Jenkins, who founded it, about Lucas Ellis, who partnered with him, about the business that served the community for 3 generations. But it does not tell the real story, the human story of pain and healing, of love hard-won and carefully tended. That story lives in the journals Olivia kept throughout her life, now preserved in a university archive, pages filled with her neat handwriting describing the ordinary and extraordinary moments of a life fully lived. In those pages, she returned again and again to that day on the trail, examining it from different angles as she aged, finding new meaning in it as her understanding deepened. In one entry written on her 50th birthday, she wrote, "I understand now that Lucas and I saved each other many times over the years, but that first time set the pattern for everything that followed. He showed me that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom, that accepting kindness was not failure but grace. And I showed him that he was worthy of love despite his losses, that staying was not a trap but a gift, that building something meant more than simply drifting through life avoiding pain." In another entry, written shortly after Lucas died, she wrote, The pain of losing him is every bit as terrible as I feared all those years ago when I first dared to love him, but I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every single day with him was worth this grief. Every laugh, every argument, every quiet evening on the porch, every crisis weathered together. I am grateful beyond measure that a lonely cowboy stopped on a snowy trail and chose kindness. That single choice gave me 46 years of marriage to the best man I have ever known, and 4 children and countless grandchildren who carry his goodness forward into the world. How can I regret the pain of losing him when the alternative was never having him at all? Those words captured the essence of their story better than any historical marker or museum display ever could. It was not a fairy tale with a happily ever after that implied eternal happiness without struggle. It was a real story about real people who faced real challenges and real losses, and who chose each other anyway, repeatedly, deliberately, for a lifetime. The last entry in Olivia's journal, written just weeks before her death, simply said, "I am ready now. I have lived a good life, longer than I ever expected when I was walking barefoot through the snow believing I would die. I have loved and been loved. I have raised children who are themselves good and kind. I have contributed something meaningful to my community. There is nothing left undone, no words unsaid. I am ready to see Lucas again, to walk beside him once more, wherever that path leads. And I am ready to finally thank my parents and Charlie for the years we had together, and to tell them about the family that came after them, the legacy they left behind even in their deaths. I am not afraid. I am just grateful for all of it, the joy and the sorrow intertwined, the full, complicated, messy, beautiful experience of being alive and human and loved." She died 2 weeks after writing those words, and her children found the journal and wept as they read her final thoughts. They understood then, perhaps more fully than ever before, the gift their parents had given them simply by choosing to love each other despite the risks, by staying when leaving would have been easier, by building a life of meaning and purpose from the wreckage of their early tragedies. And so the story ends, not with a grand dramatic finale, but with the quiet close of a life well lived, a love story that spanned decades, a legacy that continues in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry forward the values Lucas and Olivia embodied: kindness, courage, loyalty, love. In the end, perhaps that is the happily ever after that matters most. Not a guarantee of eternal happiness without pain, but the knowledge that the love was real, the time together was precious, and the choice to walk beside each other through whatever came was worth every moment of fear and joy alike. That is the story of Lucas Ellis and Olivia Jenkins, the lonely cowboy and the barefoot girl who found each other in the snow and built something that lasted far beyond their mortal years. Their story reminds us all that small acts of kindness can change lives, that love is always worth the risk, and that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with a simple invitation: walk beside me.